there's an absolute ton of third-person shooters on the PlayStation 3, and while Fuse is nowhere near one of the best, it's still a competent adventure that manages to bring some new ideas to the table. It sees you controlling one of 4 members of the Overstrike Specialist Team, a group of crackshot mercenaries who are called in to investigate a classified research facility, and what starts off as a one-off crisis management job soon turns into an absolute nightmare. It all revolves around a radioactive substance known as Fuse, and an organization named Raven who are intent on threatening the world. Thankfully, gameplay is the strongest aspect of Fuse, with each of the Overstrike members having access to a special weapon, with one being able to absorb and propel bullets back towards the enemy, as well as a selection of your standard shotguns, pistols and machine guns that make the gunplay really compelling. The controls actually work quite well, and everything is tight and responsive, allowing you to experiment with the various options you're given with ease. A true sense of progression is provided by the leveling and skill tree system that allows you to develop your character with various abilities that have a meaningful impact on the gameplay, but most notably is the inclusion of co-op that allows you to enjoy the campaign with up to 3 other players. They stand in for your other teammates and provide a much more enjoyable experience than when solely relying on the AI. If this one passed you by when it first released, it's still well worth picking up and giving a go. Blades of Time shares much in common with the likes of Heavenly Sword and God of War, but with one difference. At its core, it's built around a central mechanic that involves the manipulation of time and manages to create a refreshing and unique take on the genre. As the player, you are cast into the role of a Yumi, and like all women who don skimpy clothes and know a stunning selection of martial arts techniques, she's a real force to be reckoned with. Now, from a narrative perspective, Blades of Time is a bit of a mess. A Yumi's multi-dimensional journey contains so many opposing factions that keeping everything coherent is as difficult as slaying the formidable foes who try to kill you. On the gameplay front, maneuverability is at its core that makes chopping down enemies a gratifying venture. A Yumi glides across the ground with style and grace, with a flashy dash allowing you to quickly dive in and out of the action. Your attacks are limited to only 2 buttons, which means you don't have much diversity in your moves, and there is a noticeable lack of weight in your heavy attacks. However, it doesn't take away from how well it controls. Positioning is vital and health is in short supply, so rushing in to unleash a mini combo and then dashing back out is a sure way to survive. It never quite reaches the highs of the games that have clearly inspired it, but Blades of Time is still a great adventure and is now available on the Switch if you fancy picking it up. At first glance, Dark Void plays a lot like Gears of War, although you can say that about any third-person shooter these days that actually works right, in much the same way that every 3D platformer on the market still owes something to Mario 64. Dark Void does something that makes all the difference in the world though. It tries some new things, and it puts some really interesting twists on the old ones, and not only does it take these risks, but they end up paying off. The first new mechanic Dark Void introduces is the vertical cover system. You can attach yourself to vertical cover and shoot up or down at enemies on other ledges. The second really neat feature Dark Void introduces is that it gives you a jetpack, and the mechanics involved are just really fun. For example, say some enemies are hiding behind cover. You can flank them with the hover mode and shoot them with your rifle, or enter flight mode and strafe them with your jetpack's armaments. If enemy aircraft are attacking, engage them in a dogfight with your jetpack, or board them entirely, kill the pilot and take the aircraft for yourself. There's so many opportunities afforded to the player thanks to these mechanics, but due to their complexity, it can be a bit overwhelming at first. As far as visuals go, it's a sort of mixed bag. The art direction is fantastic, but the character models themselves are nothing spectacular, nor are many of the textures. I think it's mostly just a trade that had to be made in order to have such massive environments populated by so many enemies and NPCs. It does look its best whilst you're flying, but I wouldn't say it looks too bad even when up close. In short, Dark Void is very good. It's rough and does have a few problems that hold it back from being totally great, but this game has a heart of gold, and you can tell the guys making it really cared about what they were doing. So if you're looking to grab something new on your PlayStation 3, it's well worth considering. As many longtime fans of the channel will know, I'm a huge fan of Ridge Racer. Ever since its introduction on the PlayStation 1, it's a series that has constantly had my attention. Now Unbounded is a completely different beast, and just as the name suggests, it's literally Ridge Racer with no limitations. As a fan of the series, I didn't really like how it deviated from the well-known formula, but when judged on its own, it's a pretty competent game. It plays a lot like Burnout and Split Second, with a huge emphasis upon destruction, as well as the Ridge Racer drifting mechanics. Cars leap, streets explode, and buildings crumble, all while your competitors are turned into fiery, slow-motion heaps of metal. Just like the originals, you've got a healthy selection of vehicles to choose from, which are all unique in their own right. When it comes to gameplay, this is the biggest difference. Drifting still does play a role, but instead of it feeling rather on rails, it's a much more dynamic system that rewards the player for careful timing and minute tweaks of both your acceleration and steering. If you overdo it, you'll end up in a fucking wall, but undercook it and you won't even make it around the bend. It takes a bit of getting used to, but once you do, you'll be screaming around the city in style. Just like the drifting, the boost gauge has seen some changes as well. Whereas before it merely gave you a simple boost, it's now essentially your main weapon of destruction. Your rivals can be flipped into twisted heaps of wreckage with a well-timed boost, as well as buildings that stand in the way being reduced to rubble. It's not just for the visual effect either, as it all manages to play into the game and affect your progression. Although personally I'll always prefer the old take on the series, there's no denying that Unbounded is still a great time. Eat Lead, the return of Matt Hazard, was first brought to the attention of gamers through an exclusive magazine preview a few months prior to its release. It literally came out of nowhere and revolves around an overweight and out-of-work video game star known as Matt Hazard. The game's script is its big draw, created by the same writer who won an award for Deadhead Fred, and it provides a constant barrage of game culture references and obvious parodies of real-life properties. It's quite easily its best aspect. Visually, it's decent enough to get by, but I can't help but feel that if given more time, they could have been even better. If you've played Dark Sector or Uncharted, then you know exactly what to expect here. Matt can carry up to 2 different weapons and switch between them on the fly. Leaning and aiming works just as it did in the aforementioned games, but Eat Lead brings an interesting feature to the table. While you're undercover, you can aim at another cover spot and press triangle to instantly sprint over. While not an overly exciting addition, it was new at the time, and helped the gunplay feel very tight and responsive, and thankfully there's plenty of enemy types to put it to use on. Throughout the adventure, Matt has to go up against new and old foes from his previous games, even 2D soldiers in some instances. While not broken, it is very vanilla. You may begin to feel that old feeling of been there done that, but overall it is an enjoyable adventure that any fan of third-person shooters will enjoy. Eternal Sonata originally released for the Xbox 360 and later received an updated version for the PS3 that managed to retain everything that made the original so great, all the while adding in some extra content that further progresses the story. The events of the game mostly take place within the dreams of the main character, but throughout the narrative, the player will see themselves coming into contact with several others that the story also focuses upon. Now, like any other RPG, the battling system is a very important aspect that can either make or break a game. Thankfully, Eternal Sonata does not disappoint. It's a turn-based formula, and before carrying out each of your turns, a short period of time is available to the player, allowing them to move at will and take action, with most of them being assigned to one of the face buttons. But the standout aspect has to be the blocking system, which soon becomes one of the more valuable mechanics in which to master. It requires precise timing to counter an incoming attack, and rewards the player by opening the enemy up to extra amounts of damage or completely interrupting their turn. If you've yet to try this one out, now is the perfect time. It's bound to satisfy long-time fans of the genre as well as those looking for something new to jump into. Alpha Protocol is an often overlooked action RPG that never quite received the love and attention it deserved. It sees players taking on the role of Michael Thornton, a secret agent part of a highly classified Black Ops agency who travels the world in order to unravel a conspiracy that threatens to put the entire human race in danger. Now, the game does start off rather slow and is what most likely contributed to its muted success, but if you stick it out, Alpha Protocol soon begins to shine. When it comes to gameplay, it truly really excels, and as with most RPGs, it'll see you developing your character over the course of the adventure, which soon becomes one of the more compelling aspects of the game. There's just so many damn options, from Soldier, which focuses on using heavy guns, to tech specialists that have a range of gadgets to use, Field Agent, which encourages the use of stealth, and many more, which all help flesh out the gameplay and accommodate for any type of approach. Of course, an extensive selection of weapons complement each of these roles, and getting new equipment and upgrading your guns, armor, and gadgets is also good fun for anyone who enjoys the equipment and customization that many RPGs offer. The best thing about Alpha Protocol, however, and what really makes the game, is the way that you can choose to interact with and deal with the different characters and events you encounter. A pretty robust dialogue system is in place and allows the player to steer the narrative in any direction they choose. Because of this, subsequent playthroughs are all the more enjoyable thanks to the broad amount of ways you can tackle each situation. Unfortunately, it's not all lollipops and rainbows, as Alpha Protocol is severely let down by some questionable technical issues, such as severe screen tear and texture loading that plagues the entire game. It's not a deal breaker, but something that needs mentioning nonetheless. All in all, Alpha Protocol is a rough but extremely satisfying game. If you're a fan of Obsidian and the RPGs that they've become known for, it's definitely worth checking out. Child of Eden simply refuses to be an ordinary game. When you first see it, you'll believe that it's just an on-rail shooter, but it is much more than that. You take control of a cursor, which serves as your only means of connecting with the world. It sees you touching these graceful and magical creatures, purging them of disease. You're exploring living structures and systems, reducing them to their essential forms. You're pushing energy through cords into buds to evolve them into flowers. You're creating life. You're connecting, opening and changing things around you. It's not about killing, it's about experiencing. I originally played it using the motion controller, but after trying the DualShock as well, it does hold up. It takes a while to get used to, but it soon feels natural to glide your hand over strange and cute butterfly creatures, or paint big blue manta rays, and then shape the controller to release colourful lasers that purify your targets. There aren't many stages, but each one is packed so full with things to see and touch that it's quite overwhelming. Each environment has a different vibe, and thankfully there's an escalating sense of difficulty that will keep players engaged, but there's other stages that are just about relaxing, enjoying the ambiance and exploring the strange and beautiful space creatures, and the music reflects the tone perfectly. Ultimately though, it's the sheer quality and variety of visual effects that make Eden stand out. There's just so much shit going on at any one time. Wireframe cubes throb and pulsate in unison, millions of tiny white stars sparkle like a shimmering blanket, fields of colourful shapes bloom on the surface of water, which makes it one of the most beautiful looking games I've ever played. Now, it won't be for everyone, but if you can get past the rather challenging setup, it soon becomes a rewarding and engaging journey. If there is one word that could sum up Wet, it would have to be ambition, but unfortunately it bites off more than it can chew and ends up falling short of brilliance. That's not saying it's a bad game by any means, but the result is something that feels only partially complete. Wet is a third-person action, adventure, shooter, platformer that wants to do well at all of these and only really succeeds in its shooting elements. The rest is all functional and technically works, but you'll have seen it done much more successfully in other games. However, because of its shooting mechanics, its grindhouse aesthetic, its sense of humour and its gleefully profane protagonist Ruby, you'll end up having a lot of fun with it. The plot, if you can even call it that, involves Ruby doing a job, succeeding at doing that job, and then being betrayed by the person who paid her to do the job. She then sets out on revenge, and this is where the game picks up. The core of the game has you in a standard third-person shooter mode with one real difference. Ruby is acrobatic, and when you're in the acrobatic mode, jumping, wall running, and sliding along the ground on your knees, you get to shoot with both of your weapons in bullet time. This is the best aspect that Wet brings to the table. This central mechanic, once you get a hold of it, helps the game stand out from all of its contemporaries, and for the 6 or so hours that you'll be playing the game, it really doesn't get boring. In all honesty, it's the non-gameplay aspects that I like the most about Wet. It looks like a grindhouse film from the 70s, or more recently a Tarantino movie. It sounds like one too, with its loud, rocking soundtrack and profanity-laden dialogue. Wet is pretty rough around the edges, but if you can look past some of the more disappointing aspects of the game, it soon becomes rather enjoyable. El Shaddai is a simple hack and slash with several platforming elements thrown in for good measure. In fact, the game is clearly divided equally between the two genres, with the journey taking you through various floors of a tower that the angels you are tracking down created. It sees you fighting small demons on the way to each of these angels, which serve as the boss of each floor. The closest reference to the feel of the combat would have to be Devil May Cry, but a much more minimal and stripped down version. There's only really two buttons that you'll use to fight, one being a mid-air attack and the other being a special move that is either offensive or evasive in nature. Now, the combat can be considered button mashy, but thanks to the inclusion of several abilities known as god weapons, a bit more variety and strategy is afforded to the gameplay. There are 3 in total: a heavy shield that is slow but strong on offense and defense, a lightsaber styled sword that's quite fast and fairly strong, and finally a strange long-range shooting weapon that's quite hard to describe, but it's fast and allows the player to dash around. Switching between all of them on the fly soon becomes the order of the day and provides a means to outsmart the enemy. This is one tough game and is likely to test even the most proficient of players, so if you're looking for a challenge, El Shaddai will be right up your street. Well, that does it for today's video. Keep an eye out for part 3 as that will be coming up soon, so don't forget to hit subscribe and tickle that bell. You can follow me on all of the socials to stay up to date on future videos. You can also join our growing community on Discord and meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to our Patreon supporters Rhino, Skill Jim, Nano, Steve, Richard, Amy, Daniel, Marcos and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining our Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon to gain access to exclusive videos as well as giveaways, you'll find those links in the description. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I'll catch you next time.